All right, Alicia, am I wrong? Is this race in Kentucky a commentary on President Trump or on Bevin himself?
I think it's a commentary on Bevin himself. And listen, I mean, as much as I would love for a Republican to be the governor there have been some decisions that he's made as governor that I have friends that are constituents of his state that they disagreed with. And it is a fascinating case study in how this gubernatorial race didn't affect Republicans down ballot, which to me means that the Republican Party is strong. Mitch McConnell isn't going to have any problems, despite the fact that Democrats there are really wanting to throw him out. They're not going to succeed there. And I don't think that this is a referendum on how Republicans are going to do in 2020 in these states, especially on the heels of this, recent New York Times poll that shows that Donald Trump would beat all of the potential Democratic contenders in those 6 key states that he was able to swing to the red back in 2016.
Right, the battleground states. The only Democrat, according to that polling, who might be competitive is Joe Biden, and that's within the margin of error. Every other Democrat contender.
4-point swing.
Right. President Trump would beat, according to polling. And I always say this, I don't trust polling to begin with. That's why we don't talk a lot about polls on this show, because the polls that come out, even when they show President Trump to be behind, well, they did in 2016 too, and look what happened. So I take them with a grain of salt. I do think it's interesting that liberals are trying to make this a commentary on the president when we know historically that special elections and off-year elections, meaning not midterms, not a presidential elections, are not generally reflective of how a presidential race is going to go. And you can look back in very recent history for examples of this. You can look at, in Georgia, the Karen Handel, John Ossoff race, with the most money ever spent on a congressional race in the history of our country. The Republican won that special election, I believe it was in June, and then went on to lose to a Democrat in the general election in 2018. They're not indicative.
Yeah, they're really not. And once again, all of the data that you pointed out that shows how swimmingly and what the large margins were between other Republicans down ballot, it really did be a huge winning night for the GOP. And I guess you could say in turn, the president. And what's laughable is how the media is trying to solely focus on Bevin as they ignore, the racism of the Democratic Party in Virginia that, of course, held blue.
Right. Well, that's the other thing that Democrats want to ignore in Kentucky, I believe. They'd like to pin anything bad that happens to Republicans on Trump, but they're ignoring the fact that the Republican who won her race by the greatest margin out of all the races in Kentucky last night was a woman who is a Republican, and the first black attorney general in the state of Kentucky. The history of that state is a black Republican. Busts their identity politics narrative. They can't stand to talk about anything of that nature. And so, of course, they try to use this to hack Trump.